It was late September when I decided to take a solo trip to Yellowstone National Park. Summer crowds had thinned out, and the air was just starting to carry that crisp, early hint of fall. I'd been working long hours back in Denver and wanted a few days alone, surrounded by nothing but forests, rivers, and open sky. I booked a small cabin just outside the park, about a 20-minute drive from the northern entrance near Gardner, Montana. It was an older place, built in the 70s maybe, with wood-paneled walls, a stone fireplace, and big windows that looked out over a stretch of pine trees. The owner, an older man named Harold, handed me the keys and gave me the usual warnings. Keep food sealed, don't leave trash outside, and watch out for wildlife, especially bears. The first day passed exactly the way I hoped. I drove into the park, hiked a trail near Mammoth Hot Springs, and spent the afternoon wandering boardwalks, steam rising around me from the hot pools and vents. The land felt ancient, alive, like it was breathing under my feet. By sunset, I was back at the cabin, sitting on the deck. It was quiet. No traffic, no voices, just the occasional crackle of branches shifting in the forest. When the stars came out, they were brighter than I'd seen in years. I remember thinking I'd made the right choice. This was exactly the kind of peace I needed. But around midnight, that peace changed. I had gone to bed with the window cracked open a little for the cool air. The room was dark except for the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the trees. At some point in the night, I woke up. Not suddenly, but in that half-conscious way where your body senses something before your mind does. At first, I thought it was the wind. There was a faint sound outside, low and steady, like something brushing against the cabin wall. I lay still, listening. After a few seconds, it came again, longer this time. A dragging sound, slow and deliberate, running along the wooden siding. I sat up in bed, my heart starting to pound. It wasn't the scurry of an animal or the sudden thump of a branch falling. It was too steady, too intentional. I reached over and flicked on the lamp by the bed. The sound stopped instantly. For a long minute, I didn't move. The cabin was silent again, except for the faint creak of wood settling. Finally, I got up, crossed the room, and peeked through the blinds. The forest outside was motionless. Moonlight spilled between the trees, silver against the grass. Nothing moved. No bear, no elk, not even the rustle of leaves. I told myself it had to be an animal, something brushing past on its way through the woods. But as I turned back toward the bed, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. Across the wooden floorboards near the wall, just below the window, there was a faint line, a thin, pale streak in the wood, fresh enough to catch the light, like something sharp had scraped across it. I didn't sleep much after that. I stayed under the covers, every sense on edge, waiting for the sound to return. But it never did. By morning, I almost convinced myself I had imagined the whole thing. Almost. The next morning, I tried to shake off what had happened. In daylight, the cabin looked harmless again. Just a simple wooden retreat, surrounded by tall pines and yellowing grass. The streak on the floor still bothered me, though. I bent down to check it more closely. It wasn't a scratch from moving furniture. The line was faint, thin, and perfectly straight, as if someone had dragged a blade or a nail carefully across the wood. I didn't dwell on it too long. I made coffee, packed a small backpack, and decided to spend the day exploring one of the trails inside the park. The weather was cool and clear, a perfect autumn day. I drove to the Lamar Valley, one of my favorite places. The road curved past golden meadows and rolling hills, where bison moved in dark clusters across the grass. In the distance, I could see steam rising from vents and the shadowed outline of mountains. It was beautiful in a way that photographs never capture, vast, silent, untamed. I pulled into a small gravel lot, where a trail cut off into the forest. There were only 2 other cars parked there. As I started out, the path was quiet, except for the crunch of leaves under my boots. The further I walked, the more the sounds of the valley faded, replaced by the steady hush of the wind through the pines. After about a mile, I came across something odd. The trail split at a fork, though the map I'd picked up that morning hadn't shown it. One side continued up a gradual incline, the other veered off into thicker trees. The second path looked less used, narrower, overgrown in places, almost hidden. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to stick to the main route, but curiosity tugged at me. I told myself I'd just follow the narrow path for a short distance and then turn back. The air grew cooler as I walked under the canopy. Shafts of sunlight cut through in thin slivers, but most of the trail was shadowed. After about 10 minutes, I noticed the ground was disturbed, patches of dirt overturned, as if something had been digging. I crouched down at one spot, expecting to see signs of an animal. But the hole was strange, not the rough paw marks of a bear or the neat circles of a badger. These were long grooves, deep and uneven, carved into the soil in parallel lines. I stood up, uneasy now, and kept walking. The trail twisted deeper, and soon I realized I hadn't seen another hiker since I left the car. It was silent, unnervingly so. No bird calls, no rustling brush, just my own footsteps. Then I saw something else. Up ahead, between the trees, stood a wooden post. As I got closer, I realized it was an old sign, weathered and leaning. The paint was almost gone, the words faded, but I could still make out part of it. Closed. Do not enter. The path continued past it, narrower still, almost swallowed by undergrowth. I froze, debating what to do. The smart choice would have been to turn around, but for reasons I can't explain, I kept going. Maybe it was the strangeness of the scratches in the dirt, maybe just stubborn curiosity. I walked another 100 yards before the smell hit me. It was faint at first, then stronger, a sour, metallic stench, like rotting meat. My stomach turned as I covered my nose with my sleeve. I told myself it had to be an animal carcass. Out here, that wasn't unusual, but when I rounded a bend, I saw the source. Just off the trail, tangled in the underbrush, lay the remains of a deer. At least, I think it was a deer. The body had been torn open, ribs exposed, the skin stretched in unnatural slashes. What unsettled me most wasn't the decay, it was the precision. The cuts were too clean, too deliberate, like they had been made with a blade rather than teeth. I backed away slowly, every hair on my arm standing on end. The forest was still silent, but now the quiet felt suffocating. My instincts screamed at me to leave. I turned and started back toward the main trail, moving faster than before, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. The whole way out, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I never heard footsteps, never saw movement in the trees, but the sensation of eyes on me was constant, pressing. When I finally reached the parking lot, both cars I'd seen earlier were gone. Mine was the only one left. By the time I got back to the cabin, the sun was dipping low. I locked the door, pulled the curtains shut, and tried to convince myself it was just nature, just an animal. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Because when I took off my boots at the door, I noticed something clinging to the sole of one of them. A thin, black thread, long, wiry, almost like hair, but it wasn't from any animal I'd ever seen. By the time I returned from Lamar Valley that evening, the forest around the cabin had grown restless. The wind had picked up, shaking branches against the roof, and the air felt heavier, colder. I tried to distract myself, made a simple dinner, and sat by the fireplace with my notebook. But the whole time, my mind kept circling back to the deer carcass, those clean cuts, and the strange black thread on my boot. When darkness fell, the silence inside the cabin became oppressive. Out in the woods, you expect some sound, crickets, owls, the distant crack of branches. That night, there was nothing, just the fire popping every so often. Around 11, I went to bed. I left the lamp on this time, the soft yellow glow pooling across the room. For a while, I lay still, listening, waiting. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a shallow sleep. I don't know what woke me. Maybe it was a sound, maybe just instinct. I rolled over and glanced at the window. The curtains were drawn, but in the quiet, I thought I heard something outside. At first it was faint, a tap, then another. Not like an animal brushing past, not like wind. This was sharper, more deliberate. Fingernails, or something like them, tapping against the glass. I froze. My breath caught in my chest. The tapping stopped, replaced by a dragging sound, like someone slowly tracing a line down the pane. I forced myself to sit up, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The sound didn't stop. It continued, patient, steady, moving from one side of the window to the other. Finally, I stood and stepped closer, the floor creaking under my weight. I pulled the curtain back just an inch. Nothing. The porch and the tree line beyond were empty, bathed in pale moonlight. But when I looked down, my stomach turned. On the glass itself, etched faintly into the condensation, was a mark. 4 long straight lines, running parallel, ending in a sharp curve at the bottom, almost like claws. I staggered back, yanked the curtain shut, and locked the window latch, even though I knew it wouldn't make much difference. My hands were trembling as I sat back on the edge of the bed, trying to steady my breathing. For a long time, I sat listening. Nothing happened. The cabin was quiet again. Fire burned low in the other room. Slowly, I convinced myself that maybe it had just been branches, maybe the wind after all. But then came the smell. At first, it was faint, just a metallic tang in the air, then stronger, rot, sour and heavy, like meat left too long in the sun. It seeped through the cracks, clinging to the room. I gagged, covering my nose with my sleeve. I checked the kitchen, the bathroom, the fireplace. Nothing. No spoiled food, no animal that had crawled in and died. The smell wasn't coming from inside. It was coming from outside. I opened the front door just a crack, enough to peek out. The smell hit me full force, sharp and nauseating. My eyes watered as I scanned the porch and the yard beyond. Nothing moved, but the odor was unmistakable, drifting in from the trees. And then I saw it. At the bottom of the steps, just where the grass began, lay something small. I squinted, heart thudding, and realized it was a piece of bone. Clean, white, no flesh attached. A deer leg bone, maybe. I shut the door hard and locked it. For the rest of the night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the armchair by the fire, staring at the door, phone clutched in my hand. But I never called anyone. Part of me was too afraid they wouldn't believe me, that they'd dismiss it as nothing. Just before dawn, the smell faded. The forest outside slowly returned to normal. The rustle of branches, a distant bird call. When I finally stepped onto the porch in daylight, the bone was gone. Not moved, not kicked aside. Gone completely. And in the dirt by the steps, pressed deep into the soil, were prints. Not boots, not hooves, bare feet. Long, narrow, with toes that seemed too sharp, too pointed, as if they had dug into the earth when they walked. By the next morning, I was running on maybe an hour of broken sleep. The coffee I made in the cabin did little to clear the fog in my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those prints outside the porch, long, unnatural, pressed into the earth, as if something barefoot had been circling while I sat awake inside. It was my 3rd day in Yellowstone, and I didn't want to cut the trip short over, what, scratches, smells, a bone left on the porch? If I told anyone, they'd laugh. They'd say it was animals, or my imagination. So instead of driving home, I drove deeper into the park. That day, I decided to hike along the Yellowstone River. The sun was bright, the air crisp, and the sound of rushing water was steady and calming. For a while, it helped. I saw fishermen on the banks, a pair of hikers across the way, even a bald eagle perched on a tree branch. Everything looked normal, safe. But the further I went downriver, the fewer people I saw. After a couple of miles, I was alone again. The trail narrowed until it was just dirt running along the water's edge, willows crowding in from both sides. That's when I heard it. At first, it blended with the sound of the river, a low hum, almost like someone whispering just out of earshot. I stopped, listening hard. The hum continued, rising and falling in rhythm. Not words exactly, but patterned, like a chant. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. Nothing. Just the river rushing past. I told myself it could be the wind, the water, echoing strangely. But as I moved on, the sound followed. Always faint, always behind me. The more I walked, the clearer it became. A voice, low, guttural, repeating the same sound over and over. I quickened my pace, boots crunching on the dirt, eyes darting to the brush. Every now and then, I thought I saw movement, a flash of dark shape between the trees, gone when I looked directly at it. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I left the trail and scrambled down to the riverbank, hoping the open space would make me feel less trapped. I knelt, splashed cold water on my face, and forced myself to breathe. That's when I noticed the smell again. Faint at first, then stronger. The same stench from the cabin, metallic, rotting, sour. It was drifting with the wind, curling over the water. And then, across the river, I saw it. At first, I thought it was a fallen log caught against the bank. But then it shifted, slowly rising, until it stood upright. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and thin, shoulders sharp, arms hanging too long at its sides. From that distance, I couldn't make out its face, only the shape of it against the trees. It was watching me, motionless. The voice started again. This time, I knew it wasn't in my head. It was coming from across the river, rolling low and steady. Not English, not any language I knew, just that same droning chant. I stumbled back, tripping on the rocks. My instinct was to run, but my legs felt heavy, locked in place. The figure didn't move closer. It didn't need to. Its voice carried across the rushing water like it was speaking right into my ear. The chant stopped. For a few seconds, there was only the river. Then it raised its arm and pointed, not at me, but at the trail behind me. I spun around, heart slamming in my chest. The path was empty. Trees swayed gently in the breeze, nothing more. But when I turned back to the river, the figure was gone. No splash, no sound of movement. Just the empty bank and the current sliding past. I didn't run. I bolted. I scrambled up the bank, nearly tearing my hands on the brush, and sprinted down the trail without looking back. My chest burned, lungs raw from the cold air, but I didn't stop until I saw other hikers in the distance. Only then did I slow down, trying to act normal, though my body was shaking. I forced myself to nod politely as I passed them, then kept walking, desperate to reach the safety of my car. When I finally made it back, my hands were trembling so badly, I struggled to fit the key in the ignition. My reflection in the rearview mirror startled me. Pale face, wide eyes, like I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. Back at the cabin, I locked every door and window before the sun went down. I thought about leaving that night, but it was late, and the roads out of the park were long and dark. I told myself I'd leave first thing in the morning. But that night, something came closer than it ever had before. Because at 3:17 a.m., I woke to the sound of my front door handle turning. Not rattling, not jiggling in the wind, turning. When I heard the handle turning, I froze in bed. For a moment, I actually held my breath, thinking maybe it was the house settling, or maybe even my imagination. But then it came again, slow, steady pressure twisting the knob, as though someone on the other side was testing it, waiting for the lock to fail. The sound was unmistakable. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, my bare feet hitting the floorboards. My phone was on the nightstand. I grabbed it, heart hammering, but my hands were slick with sweat, clumsy. I dialed 911, whispered my location to the dispatcher. The woman's calm voice on the other end told me to stay where I was, to stay on the line, that officers were being sent from Gardner. As she spoke, the handle stopped moving. For a few seconds, there was silence. Then came the scratching, slow, dragging lines across the wood of the door, the same sound I'd heard that first night inside the cabin. Only this time, it wasn't against the siding. It was on the inside surface of the door itself. I couldn't stop shaking. The dispatcher kept asking me questions, if I was safe, if I could barricade myself, but I barely heard her. Every nerve in my body was locked on that sound. Finally, the scratching stopped, and then, soft but clear, a voice. Low, guttural, the same rhythm I'd heard by the river. A chant. Repeated, steady, vibrating through the wood, as though the door itself was carrying the sound into the room. My chest seized. I couldn't move, couldn't answer the dispatcher when she called my name. Then, 3 heavy blows against the door, each one so hard the frame shook, dust falling from the rafters above. The last strike was so violent I thought the hinges might snap. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the rug. Silence followed. Thick, absolute silence. Even the dispatcher's voice seemed muffled, far away. I forced myself into the kitchen, grabbing the heaviest thing I could find, an iron fire poker from beside the fireplace. My pulse thudded so loud in my ears it drowned everything else. I kept the phone in one hand, the poker in the other, my back pressed to the counter. Then came the smell. Strong this time, overwhelming, pouring in from every crack and seam in the walls. Metallic rot, like blood and sulfur mixed. I gagged, covering my mouth, eyes watering. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe minutes, maybe an hour. My sense of time collapsed into one long stretch of fear. At last, headlights cut through the trees outside. Red and blue lights flashed against the cabin walls. Relief hit me so fast, my knees buckled. I dropped the poker, ran to the window, and yanked the curtain aside. 2 sheriff's trucks had pulled up. I saw men step out, their flashlights sweeping the yard. I unlocked the door and let them in, blurting out everything in a rush. The handle turning, the scratching, the voice. They searched the cabin, the porch, the yard, then fanned out into the tree line with beams of light. Nothing. Not a footprint, not a broken branch, not even the faintest sign that anyone had been there. But when one of the deputies shined his light low across the floor inside, we saw it, etched into the wood, just beneath the doorframe. 4 long parallel gouges, fresh, clean, as if they had been carved into the floor while I stood only a few feet away. The deputy crouched down, tracing the marks with his finger. His expression shifted, something tight, uneasy. He didn't say what he was thinking, but I could see it in his eyes. That night, they insisted I leave the cabin. One of them followed me to a motel in town, told me I should stay there until I went home. He never said why, but before he left, he gave me a look I'll never forget. A look that said he believed me, but didn't want to. I left Yellowstone the next morning, drove straight back to Denver, no stops, no detours. It's been months since then, and I haven't gone back, haven't been near the park. Sometimes I wonder if what I saw was real, or if exhaustion and solitude twisted my mind. But then I think about the smell, the chanting, the gouges in the wood that didn't exist the day before. And most of all, I think about what the deputy muttered as he walked back to his truck that night, maybe not even meaning for me to hear. Not the first time someone's called from that cabin.